feet into the bay to bring my people water to live another day. When I see the water goddess, I have nothing to say. I simply kneel down and pray that on this day we'll all be Occasional Solutions Podcast.
All right.
Howdy doody.
Back again.
Yeah.
I'm Graham.
I'm Ashkahn. And this is real. Like, this is a real episode. We're doing a real, like, live. I mean, man, like, this is going to be new information
well, it's live,
coming
once
at you.
again, live for us, not for you.
Oh, yeah.
The audio. We've gone over this a few times.
I know. I forget. It seems like they're here. That's the thing that
it's
keeps
true. We hold
confusing
them.
me.
We hold you all so close.
And we have pictures of
in our
you all
hearts.
around this room, so I keep getting that confused. But yeah, okay.
Right. But it is live for us. Your
live,
excitement
yeah,
was,
we're
and we're
live.
here. This is probably the real world and not just some weird simulation. There's
yeah,
a lot to be stoked
yeah.
on. And we have some information to share too.
Yeah, so this is an update on what's going on out there in the world.
News. So it's called
breaking.
News.
This news is just broken, and we were reporting on it here. Breaking news.
Yep, fresh off the presses from June 28th.
Yeah, it took us a little bit to get over here, but we're here now.
So there was a paper that got published up in British Columbia on a case of Pseudomonas that was found both in and probably caused by a float tank.
Yeah,
which is really interesting.
Yeah, it does seem like someone out there got sick from a float tank, and that's where we can put that dun 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 sound effect that we have.
Hold on, let me just look it up really quick.
Okay.
All right, there we go. Yeah. So that's about how you should feel.
Hopefully
after
that
hearing
added some
news.
drama to this whole episode here. So basically, what happened?
Yeah, when did things go so wrong is the question.
So maybe some context first before we even get into what happened.
Float tanks are
this is as far as we know the first actual kind of case of someone getting sick in a float tank.
Someone getting sick.
Like
of
this,
any type.
The first time, like an actual like health
other than like
authority,
throwing up, but not like like actually getting like sick with a
like
bug
an infectious
or,
disease.
Yeah, exactly.
So like this is the first time like a health authority has actually like found a case of someone from a like commercial float facility and like linked an illness to it. And so I mean it's been for the entire history of the float industry going on that this is yet to happen. So it is interesting to see that we do actually have a case of that.
So Pseudomonas, we should talk about a little bit before we get too deep into other things. So you might recognize it actually if you've been on top of water sanitation research that's happened. It's often one of the test bacteria that gets used for different studies. It's also one of the ones that we used for our NSF study with just pure salt water to see how that would affect different organisms. And it's also just called hot tub rash. Is kind of its nickname. Likes warmer water, skin irritant, and apparently can also cause some other problems, which we'll get into a little further down describing this, which I wasn't even aware of until this study. But normally it's a rash that you get from going into a hot tub with other people and it not being the best environment.
And you see it around a lot because it really just is one of the most common illnesses that comes from kind of recreational water.
And it's everywhere
and beyond
as well.
that.
Like it's pretty much everywhere. Like Pseudomonas just exists in most water sources and supplies and just not nearly high enough concentrations to worry about.
But yeah, it can give you, illness and skin infections and other things like that. And there are a lot of reported cases of it each year in all sorts of different avenues. And that's why you see it tested for a lot as well. It's one of the things that we test for every month when we take water samples into the lab. We're testing for Pseudomonas. It's in those kind of like research papers. The NSF, when they test for the efficacy of disinfection equipment, if like they're testing a UV system or they're testing an ozone system, it's one of the things they test for to see if you can properly kill Pseudomonas. So it is really out there a lot and tested for a lot because it is kind of just one of the most ubiquitous actual like contagious diseases people can get out there. And in float tanks, it's particularly interesting because you can get it from it just getting on your skin. And when we talk about other ways of getting sick in float tanks, there's a lot of gastrointestinal illnesses.
Like those are usually the main concerns that a lot of pools have. Is like they're really trying to,
is a huge. I mean, that one alone is like over 50% of like all illnesses each year. E. coli, Giardia, neurovirus, like all this sort of stuff these are gastrointestinal illnesses, which mean
one of the things they have in common too is that they all look terrifying under a microscope if you look at them.
Yeah, creepy little crawlers.
But another thing they have in common.
Basically, to get sick from them, you have to ingest them, right? They have to go like swallow. You have to swallow them and get them into your gastrointestinal tract, and that's one of the things where how float tanks work versus how pools and spas work can really come into play, right? Like you just accidentally swallow pool water when you're swimming, and everybody does it. It's hard to avoid. Goes up your nose, gets in your mouth. They've studied it, all that sort of stuff, and like you have to swallow enough of this stuff to be able to get sick from it.
And with float tanks, I mean, you can just kind of visualize in your head how hard it is to imagine getting any kind of amount of the salt water that would near the amount in a pool or anything like that into your nose or mouth, much less swallowing it. If you did, it's usually one of those cases where you get a couple drops on your tongue and then you're like, yeah. Yeah.
So Pseudomonas is a skin disease, though, right? So we don't get that same kind of just natural lower risk from contact that we do from some of these gastrointestinal illnesses. So that is one reason that, as the float industry, we've also been curious about looking at it and monitoring it and seeing if it is something that could get somebody sick.
So, what the heck happened? Like, the who, the what, the where, the when? Why did this pop up?
Yeah, so this is it's a place up in British Columbia. It was a commercial float center. They don't say in the article exactly which place it was. They don't name the center or anything like that. But they do say it was in Vancouver. And really, like, the main thing in here that I feel like has to be considered for all the rest of this, like, it does seem like somebody got sick from Pseudomonas in a float tank, but what happened here is, according to this article, a customer was taken and put into a float tank.
And this is back in 2017.
This is in 2017, yeah. So this is a case from October of 2017 is when this all this stuff actually happened. But like the big thing here is that someone put a customer into a float tank that had been non-operational for a couple weeks. So like it sounds like something broke in their filtration system. They couldn't turn the pump on or filter the float tank. They didn't use it. It just sat unused. And then
not properly being disinfected or anything like that. Like literally just stagnant float tank sitting there not being cared for.
Yeah, British Columbia requires chlorine. They say they didn't put any chlorine in during that time or anything. And then they put a customer into it. Like accidentally, one would hope.
After 2 weeks of not being filtered and just sitting there.
Yeah, and then that person got a pretty bad case of Pseudomonas. Like actually had to go to like the hospital, and it wasn't just like a light rash or anything like that.
Yeah, like internal Pseudomonas with all kinds of complications. It actually was
pretty
like
serious
really,
ear
really
infection.
bad. Yeah.
So that's what happened. So someone, and it does seem like. So they talk a little bit in this article before we get into some of the other details. I guess one thing that is interesting is like how do they know it was actually from the float tank?
Mm-hmm.
And they do discuss that. So one thing they did was they asked this person who went to see the doctor, and that's how they linked it back to this float center and everything, if they had done anything else in the 10 days around. There's a certain window of time that you can actually get Pseudomonas before you even see symptoms. So they took that whole kind of window of time and asked them if they were in any other sort of venue that could have gotten them sick, like a pool or a hot tub or any other water park, anything like that. And they said that
hotel room, bathtub, something like that. And they said no. The float tank was really the only kind of out of the normal thing they had done that would involve any kind of body contact like that with water that would give them Pseudomonas. So at least according to them, they're like, this is the only source really that they think is reasonable.
Other things that make it seem like it probably was this float tank, they did test the float tank and it did have very high levels of Pseudomonas in it. Unfortunately, we don't really know the exact levels. The environmental health office there went in and investigated this after, a few days when they realized what was going on. And I think they got levels of 200-ish, But it turns out that was also the highest level that their test kit went to. So let's
And that's
see,
kind of
they're
how
at
it is for everything. Yeah,
200.5.
they like maxed out all of the different tests for these, and so we don't really get a good understanding of exactly how bad
Yeah,
the
but we know it was at
situation was in
least
the float tank.
200. So that's like the one quantifiable thing we know out of here. So yeah, it could have been and likely was much higher than that. But at the very least, we do know the float tank had Pseudomonas in it and had it at a decent level.
Yeah, and then in addition, I guess just kind of closing out, also a way they tried to establish that is Pseudomonas actually has different isolates. Like you can imagine, it changes and kind of morphs over time as it combines with different hosts and
Evolution.
yeah, right, and really quick. Yeah,
It's rapid evolution.
Yeah, exactly, like
Yeah.
microbiological evolution. So, so you can actually get these different identifiable strains, basically, or they're called isolates of Pseudomonas. And so they tried to compare the isolates they found from the float tank to the person, and that's kind of where it broke down. They didn't actually get matching isolates, or this would be or the what they got.
I think
They were similar to each other, but didn't match what was in the float tank, is I believe what happened. And basically, what that means is, hey, like it would have been a long shot anyway. It would be really nice if close to the time of infection, or when the person was coming in before they got antibiotics, they could have taken these samples and determined the isolates. But after rounds of antibiotics, after the float tank already had some treatment, it's kind of unlikely that the Pseudomonas is going to be in the same kind of group anyway, was the conclusion. So it means that we can't definitively say they got Pseudomonas from the float tank, but with the other information coming in, I personally think that it's pretty likely.
Yeah, I mean, so this is really the part where like we're just not microbiologists and can't really speak authoritatively about isolates and what the heck is going on there. But from the people we talk to who are microbiologists
and can speak authoritatively about them,
it seemed to be the case. It was like, yeah, it's not like a 100% guarantee sort of thing, but like it doesn't like disprove that this came from the float tank because the isolates didn't match. And it does seem like they wished that slightly more controlled research was done in this, like earlier sampling of both the float tank and the person, so that there wasn't a gap of time and antibiotics and testing from the person's ear and all sorts of different things that could have led to, even if it was originally from the float tank, still different isolates. So again, as far as we can tell, my impression of it is that it does really seem like, at least from what we're reading in this article, that this did come from the float tank.
And I mean, other things to note, like it makes like a float tank that hasn't been kept up for a couple weeks, and who knows what state it was in before that point, even when the pump was breaking down, or maybe some of the equipment was just starting to break and hadn't totally hit that point where it was totally inoperable. But the thought that there could be a float tank out there that was not actually kept up to standards and was never meant to have a human being thrown in it, could get someone sick, is not also the most outlandish thing.
Yeah, I mean, and it seems like this place, it wasn't like super in communication with the kind of float community at large. So I wouldn't be surprised if their general operations weren't totally up to snuff, or they weren't doing a super great job, kind of, even before this happened, in terms of general cleaning and maintenance.
And another small thing to note also along that level too, which I don't know how much weight we should put on this, but the person who actually got sick said that they reported an inability to float freely in the tank, which the author of the article kind of said might be related to low magnesium levels. It also might just be a low water level in general.
Yeah.
It is kind of interesting, if you're keeping a tank there and it's unmaintained, if you're also cutting off the heat, then it starts to crystallize over time. So it's very possible that they dilute a tank that was kept around for longer. This is all conjecture.
Kind of speculation.
Yeah, exactly. Or it could have just evaporated off enough
yeah.
water as well that the water level was lower, and so they were touching the bottom and didn't feel floaty. But there's at least a chance that their magnesium levels were not as high as they usually are in there.
The weird thing about this is we just did this whole water activity study and found that at least the results we found was that the water activity of the float tank was lower than the level that magnesium needs to be able to grow very well.
And if this sounds, if you're like you don't understand what we're talking about here, just listen to the last OSP Occasional Solutions podcast episode.
Yeah, one of the last few.
One of the last several. Anyway, we
we'll
go
put
over
it in the show notes.
we go over water activity in depth in our new reports. That's what we're referencing here. Yeah.
So yeah, the question is like, was this study like, were they actually at a lower specific gravity that would affect something like, or would make it more likely that Pseudomonas could survive well? And the other thing is we have this NSF.
That's exactly
that
one
did,
too.
right?
I was going to say it's like a double whammy. Yeah, because the
yeah.
NSF study, which again we'll link to in the show notes, along with a picture of Ashkahn with giant rainbows coming out of his ears.
Oh, yeah, that sounds nice.
Yeah, we that one was done with just salt water and Pseudomonas and another little micro bug that we won't talk about, Enterococcus. But it killed off Pseudomonas over 24 hours of having no disinfectant and just being shaken occasionally on a table. So like there's this evidence to show that
at the occasionally shaken solution.
That was good.
Nice.
Hold on, pause for laughter. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Perfect.
But right, like so there, we have evidence in two different directions: water activity and just this actual very formal shaker test study with nothing but salt water, showing that the salt water at the concentrations that we have it will kill Pseudomonas just kind of naturally on its own.
So yeah, it's weird. So all that adds up to like a very interesting question as to how a float tank even left unattended if it was not diluted, or I don't know. It's hard to. I wish there was more information about this. I guess like it's hard to contact like anyone who necessarily would be able to give a like scoop onto what was going on there, because it also seems just like after this was reported, the environmental health offices had not done a huge amount of data collection before that float center started to actually try to like get the float tank back up and running. I mean,
they were shut down, by the way.
They were shut down.
Was shut down.
And they said they had to fix the float tank and stuff, but there's no specific gravity measurement from during this time. There's no measurement of, and any of the stuff that might be useful in kind of decoding what could have happened there.
They didn't invite us out to be celebrity investigators.
I know we have our detective hats, we have our magnifying glasses.
I don't know what went wrong here, but
they screwed up. That's what I'm saying.
It would have been nice to have some extra information.
So yeah, unfortunately, we're a little sparse on details, but I mean, what are you gonna say? Like the takeaways.
Oh yeah. So you go.
Basically, like, to me, it's like, okay, it does seem like a case of Pseudomonas happened from a float tank, and it does seem like someone actually got sick from a commercial float tank. So, that is something that clearly now is within the realm of reality, right? I mean, that's the bad news. Someone did get sick, and not just like a light sickness, like they got pretty severely ill from it. And the other part of this is just that these were like really extreme circumstances.
Can you even really call it a float tank at that point? Like, it's more like a water container that doesn't even it doesn't even have the functioning equipment on the back. Who knows what the specific gravity was?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good reminder for all of us out there to like realize that this, we are doing all this stuff for a reason, and it's good. But I don't know. It's kind of like. It feels like someone, like a restaurant, like leaving a meal out on the counter for like 2 days.
Or like 2 weeks.
Or 2
right?
weeks.
Like it's like your meal's been there for 2 weeks and
then,
someone comes in and eats it.
And then you're like, that person got sick. And you're like, yeah, like that restaurant was doing a real bad job
really
of what it was
right?
doing. Like, so I don't know. Like, it's not like the most alarming news to me, I guess. Like, I don't see this as an indication that there is a widespread problem in the float industry or anything.
No, and even, this is brought up on some calls with different environmental health people, other researchers in my microbiology, and they, pretty much expressed the same thing. Like, yeah, obviously this is a float tank that was being like not run abysmally. It's not even like it was a terrible float tank that was open for business. Like it was just out of commission and absolutely should not have been allowed to float people. So I didn't get the world of environmental health is very broad, and there are many different jurisdictions and officers out there, but it's hard to imagine that anyone would really read through this article and come away alarmed about a public health risk that float tanks are posing. And so, again, our experiences even with just public health officials so far, they've had that impression. They're not trying to be like, oh, you need to straighten up because look, it's getting people sick now, I
mean, the thing is, like, Vancouver has regulation. There are like float tank regulations in British Columbia, and they require chlorine, and they're like they're not the lightest set of rules. You know, they
No.
have probably one of the most robust written out set of float tank, like rules that you have to abide by of pretty much anywhere that I know of. They're like on the like short list of places with fully fleshed out float tank regulations.
For sure. There's the private one that's just like Graham's secret code that I keep locked up. But, other than that.
So this is with health inspectors going out and inspecting, and them having to get permitted, and that whole process being in place. So I don't know. I don't know if there's any like huge takeaways to actually take away from this.
It's really good to know that it exists.
Yeah, mostly we just wanted to inform people in case like you hear about this and it comes up, that like here's the rest of the details. Because if you just hear someone got sick from a float tank, I don't feel like that really paints the fullest picture.
Yeah, and of course we'll have the full article in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
So yeah,
cool.
There you have
That's it.
Yeah,
that's the scoop. We scooped it.
Yeah, and again, if you have other questions that you'd like to see us answer on here, it's just
we're not really doing that anymore.
It's just
now
you really need to come to terms with reality as it exists in the 21st century.
We just do these when we want to now, occasionally. So.
But if you have intro song requests, we will honor those.
Yeah, definitely. Please email those in to introsong@floathq.com.
Perfect.
Cool. See you guys later.
Me too. I'll see you later too.